The inheritance letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped between an overdue electric bill and a coupon for pizza that Marie Kellerman would never use. Her hands trembled as she held the cream-colored envelope, official and heavy, embossed with the name of a law firm she'd never heard of, Whitmore Associates, from a town called Millbrook she couldn't place on any map in her memory. The return address felt like a whisper from another lifetime, and as she stood in the narrow kitchen of their double-wide trailer, with the afternoon sun cutting through the Venetian blinds in dusty stripes, Marie felt the weight of something ancient settling onto her shoulders. Her husband Frank wouldn't be home for 3 more days. His Peterbilt was somewhere between Oklahoma City and Denver, hauling refrigerated produce across endless highways that swallowed him whole for weeks at a time. She could picture him now, one calloused hand on the wheel, country music playing low, his eyes fixed on the white lines that ran like sutures across America's vast body. They'd been married for 14 years, and she'd spent at least half that time alone, learning to fix the plumbing herself, to discipline their son without backup, to sleep in a bed that felt too large and too cold. Marie's fingers worked along the envelope's seal, careful not to tear whatever was inside. The paper whispered as she extracted a single sheet, typed in formal language that made her read each sentence twice to extract its meaning. "Dear Mrs. Kellerman," it began, and she recognized the mechanical sympathy of legal prose. "We regret to inform you of the passing of your distant aunt, Constance Merriweather, who departed this life on August 3rd. Marie stopped breathing. She didn't have an aunt named Constance. The family tree in her mind held no branches that extended to anyone with such an elegant, old-fashioned name. But the letter continued with relentless certainty. Constance Merriweather had been her maternal grandmother's sister, a woman who'd vanished from family gatherings before Marie was born, who'd become nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered at reunions. The strange one, the recluse, the Merriweather who'd turned her back on civilization and chosen isolation over family. And now this ghost from a forgotten lineage had reached across death itself to tap Marie on the shoulder and hand her something impossible. 347 acres of forest land in Millbrook County, Pennsylvania, a property known locally as Hollowridge Forest, and a house, if the letter's careful language could be trusted, that had stood for over a century, waiting through decades of neglect for someone to claim it. Marie read the words again, her lips moving soundlessly. 347 acres. The numbers felt obscene in their abundance. She and Frank rented this trailer on a quarter-acre lot, surrounded by other families who were equally one paycheck away from catastrophe. Land was something rich people had, something she'd only seen in magazines at the dentist's office, rolling estates with white fences or mountain properties where celebrities built their vacation homes. "Mom!" The voice startled her so badly she nearly dropped the letter. Her son Ethan stood in the doorway, 12 years old, and already showing signs of the height that would eventually match his father's. His dark hair stuck up at odd angles, still messy from sleep, even though it was past 3 in the afternoon. Summer vacation had turned his internal clock nocturnal, gaming until dawn, sleeping until the sun was high. "What's wrong? You look weird." Marie forced a smile that felt like a mask slipping over a real face. "Nothing's wrong, baby. Just some mail about a relative who passed away." Ethan's eyes, so much like Frank's, that particular shade of hazel that shifted between green and brown depending on the light, narrowed with premature wisdom. He'd learned to read her moods the way sailors learn to read the sky, a survival skill developed in a household where money was always tight and tension ran like an underground river beneath every conversation. "Someone died? Who?" "Someone I never met. A great-aunt. She left us some property." "Property? Like what? A house?" "A house and land. A lot of land. In Pennsylvania. A forest, actually. 347 acres. Ethan's eyes went wide, and for a moment he looked exactly as he had at 5 years old, discovering that the world contained things he'd never imagined. A forest? Like our own forest? The possessive pronoun hung in the air between them. Our own. As if ownership was something that could be claimed so easily, as if a piece of paper could bridge the gap between their cramped existence and the vast wilderness described in formal legal language. Marie felt a flutter of something dangerous in her chest. Hope, maybe, or its reckless cousin, possibility. "I don't know what it means yet," she said, trying to anchor herself in practicality. "I need to talk to your father. There are probably taxes and maintenance and 1,000 things we can't afford. It might be better to just sell it." But even as she spoke, Marie knew she was lying to herself. She could already feel the pull of that unnamed forest, those 347 acres calling to something deep in her bones. All her life had been lived in spaces measured by square footage, tiny apartments, mobile homes, rentals where the landlord's rules determined whether she could paint the walls or plant a garden. The idea of land that stretched beyond sight, of trees that belonged to no one but her, made her breath catch in her throat like a prayer she didn't know how to speak.
"Hey, can we go see it?" Ethan's question was immediate, his mind already racing ahead to adventure, to exploration, to the kind of freedom that existed only in boys' imaginations and young adult novels. "Maybe. I don't know. Let me call the lawyer first." Marie reached for her phone, then hesitated. What would she even ask? The letter included a number, but the thought of calling made her palms sweat. She'd never inherited anything in her life. Her own parents had died with nothing but debt, their possessions sold to cover funeral costs that still weren't fully paid. The idea that someone, even a stranger with shared blood, had thought of her, had chosen her to receive this legacy, felt like a cosmic error. The afternoon stretched into evening. Marie tried to focus on ordinary things, folding laundry, starting dinner, checking Ethan's summer reading list. But her mind kept circling back to the letter. She pulled up Millbrook County on her phone, zooming in on satellite images that showed a patchwork of green, interrupted by the occasional road or small town. Hollowridge Forest appeared as a dark mass on the map, a shadow among shadows, too dense for the satellite to penetrate. No street view was available. The surrounding area looked sparse, a few scattered houses, a main street that probably served as the entire downtown, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers were marked immediately. When she finally called Frank that night, he was parked at a truck stop outside Albuquerque, eating a microwave burrito and watching a movie on his laptop. His voice came through scratchy and distant, layered with the ambient noise of idling engines and the hiss of air brakes. "You're kidding me," he said, after she'd explained everything twice. "An aunt you never heard of just left you a forest?" "That's what the letter says. Frank, it's 300 acres, more than that." A long pause, filled with static and the muffled conversation of other drivers. "What's the catch?" "I don't know if there is one. The lawyer said I need to come out there to sign papers and see the property. It's ours free and clear, but there are back taxes and—" "How much in back taxes?" Marie had been dreading this question. $17,000. Frank's exhale crackled through the speaker. "Jesus, Marie, we don't have $17,000. We don't have $1,700. I know that. But Frank, think about it. If the land is worth anything, we could take out a loan, pay the taxes, and then sell it. Even if we only get $50,000 for the whole thing, that's enough to what? Get out of debt? Maybe, if we're lucky." His voice softened, the initial shock giving way to the careful consideration she'd fallen in love with. Frank wasn't impulsive. He measured twice and cut once, thought through every angle. "What's the house like? Is it livable?" "The letter doesn't say much, just that it's been vacant for a while. The lawyer said I should see it before making any decisions." Another pause, longer this time. She could almost hear him thinking, weighing options, calculating risks. This is how they'd survived. Frank planning 3 moves ahead, while Marie held their daily life together with wire and prayer. "When can you go?" he asked finally. "I could drive up this weekend. It's only 6 hours. Ethan's supposed to go to my sister's, but—" "Take him with you. Kid could use an adventure. And you shouldn't go alone. Something feels off about this, Marie. I can't put my finger on it, but people don't just give away forests. There's got to be a reason nobody else wanted it." His words sent a chill down her spine, but she pushed it aside. "You're sounding like you're trying to talk me out of it." "No, I'm not. I'm just saying be careful. Look, I'll be home Tuesday night. If you can wait until then, we'll go together." The lawyer wants me to come this week, something about probate deadlines. Frank sighed, and in that sound she heard all the accumulated weariness of long roads and longer nights of a man trying to provide for a family he rarely saw. Okay, go. But call me every night, and if anything seems weird, you get out of there. Promise me. I promise. And Marie, don't get your hopes up too much, okay? This kind of thing, it's usually too good to be true.
But it was too late for that warning. Hope had already taken root, spreading through her like wild ivy, impossible to contain. That night she lay awake in their bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles, imagining trees. In her mind, the forest took shape. Towering oaks and silent pines, clearings where sunlight pooled like liquid gold, streams cutting silver paths through the undergrowth. She imagined Ethan running through those woods, building forts, discovering the kind of wildness that had been bred out of suburban childhoods. She imagined Frank coming home not to this metal box, but to a real house, something with history and permanence, something that could be theirs in a way nothing else had ever been. The next morning, Marie packed their bags with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to travel light. Clothes for 3 days, toiletries, Ethan's medication for his asthma, just in case. She threw in sleeping bags and a cooler, uncertain what they'd find when they arrived. The lawyer had mentioned a caretaker who checked on the property occasionally, but the house itself had been empty for nearly 2 decades. There might not be running water or electricity. They might have to camp. Ethan was vibrating with excitement, asking questions she couldn't answer. Do you think there are deer? Bears? Could we hunt? Could I build a treehouse? Each question was a small door opening onto dreams he'd never been allowed to have. His whole life had been marked by limitations. No pets because the landlord didn't allow them. No bike tricks because they couldn't afford the ER. No loud music because the neighbors complained. The idea of 300 acres where he could yell if he wanted to, where there were no neighbors to complain, no landlord to appease, made him nearly drunk with possibility. They left at dawn on Saturday, the old Honda packed to the roof, heading east into a sunrise that painted the sky in shades of warning, crimson and gold, beautiful and ominous. Marie drove with both hands on the wheel, her mind split between the road ahead and the mystery waiting at its end. Beside her, Ethan had his earbuds in, nodding to music she couldn't hear, his knee bouncing with restless energy. The highway gave way to smaller roads, then to 2-lane country routes that wound through hills covered in summer green. They passed through towns that looked frozen in time, main streets with empty storefronts, churches with white steeples, grain silos rising like monuments to a fading way of life. The GPS led them deeper into Pennsylvania's rural heart, where the farms grew larger and the houses more sparse, until civilization itself seemed to thin out like paint stretched too far across canvas. It was late afternoon when they finally saw the sign, Millbrook, population 847. The town was exactly what Marie had imagined, a single main street, a diner that probably served as the social center, a post office, a gas station, a hardware store with sun-faded advertisements in the windows. A few people walked the sidewalks, moving with the unhurried pace of those who knew everyone they might meet. As Marie drove through, she felt eyes following the Honda, marking them as outsiders, strangers entering a closed circle. The law office was at the end of Main Street, a brick building that might have been beautiful once, now weathered by years and neglect. Marie parked and took a deep breath, her hands still gripping the steering wheel. "You ready?" she asked Ethan. He pulled out his earbuds and looked at her with eyes that held both excitement and something else, a flicker of apprehension, as if he could too feel the strangeness settling over them like morning fog. "Yeah, let's go see our haunted forest." It was meant as a joke, the kind of thing a 12-year-old said to break tension.
But as they walked toward the door of Whitmore Associates, Marie felt those words lodge in her chest like a premonition. Haunted forest. The phrase echoed in her mind as she reached for the door handle, as a bell chimed their arrival, as a receptionist looked up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mrs. Kellerman?" the woman asked, and Marie nodded, suddenly unable to speak. "Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. He said to tell you to welcome home." Welcome home. The words felt like a door closing behind her, like a trap springing shut, like the beginning of something she didn't yet have the language to understand. The lawyer's office smelled of old paper and lemon furniture polish, a combination that reminded Marie of libraries and courtrooms, places where other people's decisions shaped lives in ways that couldn't be undone. Mr. Whitmore was older than she had expected, perhaps 70, with silver hair combed back from a high forehead and reading glasses that hung from a chain around his neck. He stood when they entered, extending a hand that felt dry and cool in Marie's grip, like touching parchment. "Mrs. Kellerman, please, sit." His voice carried the particular accent of rural Pennsylvania, where certain vowels stretched and others compressed, creating a musical quality that felt both foreign and somehow ancient. He gestured to two leather chairs facing his desk, their surfaces cracked with age, but still dignified, still holding on to the memory of better days. Ethan took one, and Marie settled into the other, her hands clasped in her lap to keep them from trembling. Mr. Whitmore lowered himself into his own chair with the careful movements of someone whose bones had begun to betray him. He opened a manila folder, thick with documents, and regarded Marie over the rim of his glasses with an expression she couldn't quite read. Curiosity, perhaps, or concern. Maybe both. "I must confess," he began, shuffling papers with methodical precision. "In 43 years of practicing law in this town, I never thought I'd see the day when Constance Merriweather's heir actually showed up." He paused, looking up at her directly. "You are aware, I assume, that you're not the first person we've contacted."
Marie felt her stomach tighten. "I'm sorry?" "Your mother was the first heir when Constance passed. We sent letters, made phone calls. She never responded." He said it without judgment, merely stating facts. "After she died, I'm sorry for your loss, by the way, we traced the line to you. Took us the better part of a year to find you, actually. You've moved quite a bit." Heat crept up Marie's neck. The moves had been necessary, following Frank's work, fleeing bad landlords, chasing cheaper rent, but hearing it summarized like that, reduced to a pattern of instability, made her feel exposed. "My mother never mentioned any of this to me." "No, I don't suppose she would have." Mr. Whitmore's expression softened slightly. "There's history there, Mrs. Kellerman. Old history. The kind that runs deep in families like roots you can't see but trip over anyway. Your grandmother and Constance had what folks used to call a falling out, though from what I understand, that's putting it mildly." Ethan leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. Marie shot him a warning glance, but the lawyer smiled, a brief, knowing expression that suggested he'd raised children of his own. "What kind of falling out?" Marie asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Bad blood had a way of traveling through generations, poisoning wells that seemed clean on the surface. Mr. Whitmore removed his glasses, cleaning them with a handkerchief pulled from his breast pocket. It was a delaying tactic, Marie realized. He was choosing his words carefully. The simple version is that Constance married a man the family disapproved of. His name was Vincent Holloway, and he was, well, let's say he had connections that made respectable people nervous. This was back in the 50s, you understand. Different times. "Connections?" Marie pressed. "What kind of connections?" The lawyer met her gaze steadily. "The organized kind, Mrs. Kellerman. Vincent Holloway ran numbers for the Philadelphia outfit. Later, he moved into other enterprises, gambling, loan sharking, some say worse. He bought the Hollowridge property in 1957, built the house with money that had no clean source. Constance knew what he was, but she married him anyway. Her family disowned her for it. The revelations settled over Marie like a cold blanket. Mafia money. The forest, her forest, had been purchased with blood money, built on a foundation of crime and violence. She thought of Frank's words from the phone call. People don't just give away forests. There's got to be a reason nobody else wanted it. "What happened to Vincent?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Disappeared in 1968. Never found." Constance lived in that house alone for another 57 years, never remarried, rarely came to town. People said she was waiting for him to come back. People also said— He hesitated, then seemed to decide something. People said the forest was haunted, that Vincent's ghost walked those woods, that anyone who went too deep never came out quite right. Ethan's eyes had gone wide. "Seriously?" "Small-town talk," Mr. Whitmore said, but there was something in his tone that suggested he didn't entirely dismiss it. "Superstition, but I'd be remiss not to mention it. You should know what you're inheriting, Mrs. Kellerman. It's not just land, it's history. Complicated history." Marie's mind reeled. She'd come here expecting paperwork and keys, maybe some minor obstacles to overcome. Instead, she was learning that her inheritance came with ghosts, literal or otherwise, and a legacy of crime she had no part in creating. The smart thing would be to sign whatever papers would let her sell it immediately, take the money, and run. Let someone else deal with Vincent Holloway's cursed forest. But even as the thought formed, she felt resistance rising in her chest. This was hers. For the first time in her life, something substantial belonged to her. Not to a landlord, not to a bank, but to her. The circumstances of how Vincent Holloway had acquired it didn't change the fact that Constance had chosen her, had reached across death and decades of family silence to give her this gift, or this burden. Maybe they were the same thing. "I want to see it," she said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "The house, the property, before I make any decisions." Mr. Whitmore nodded, as if he'd expected this response. "Of course. I can drive you out there now if you'd like. Fair warning, it's been vacant for some time. The caretaker keeps the worst of nature at bay, but it's not in move-in condition." "Who's the caretaker?" "A local man named Dale Pritchard. He was, friendly with Constance in her later years. He's the one who found her when she passed. He's agreed to meet us there, show you around." The lawyer began gathering papers, placing them back in the folder with the same careful precision he'd used to remove them. "There's one more thing you should know before we go." Marie braced herself. Of course there was more. "The back taxes I mentioned in the letter, $17,000, that's just what's owed to the county. There are other debts attached to the property. Liens from contractors who worked on the house over the years and were never fully paid. A mortgage that was taken out in the 80s and defaulted on. All told, you're looking at close to $40,000 in obligations before the property is truly clear." 40,000. The number hit her like a physical blow. That wasn't just out of reach, it was impossible. She and Frank had maybe $3,000 in savings, money they'd scraped together for emergencies, for the inevitable moment when the car died or someone got sick. 40,000 might as well have been 40 million. "How much is the property worth?" Her voice sounded hollow in her own ears. Mr. Whitmore's expression was unreadable. "Hard to say. Land values in this area are depressed. Timber rights might bring something, but the forest is a protected watershed, so logging is restricted. The house itself has historical significance, but it would need extensive renovation. If you could clear the debts, you might get $100,000 for the whole package, maybe more to the right buyer." 100,000 minus 40 in debts left 60. $60,000 was still more money than Marie had ever imagined having at one time. It could change everything. Pay off their credit cards, put a down payment on a real house, give Ethan a college fund. But first, they'd have to come up with 40,000 they didn't have. There might be another option. the lawyer said slowly, as if testing the waters. There's been interest in the property over the years. A development company out of Pittsburgh has made offers before. They want to build a resort, luxury cabins, a spa, that sort of thing. They've offered $200,000, and they'd assume all the debts as part of the deal. $200,000, free and clear. Marie's heart hammered. That was life-changing money. That was freedom. "What's the catch?" Ethan asked, and Marie was startled to hear her own skepticism echoed in her son's voice. Mr. Whitmore smiled thinly. "Sharp boy." "The catch is they want to clear-cut most of the forest, keep maybe 20 acres of old growth for atmosphere, develop the rest. It would change the character of the area significantly. Some folks in town aren't happy about it. Constance certainly wasn't. She rejected their offers repeatedly." Marie closed her eyes. Of course. The easy path required destroying the very thing that made the property valuable. 300 acres of old forest, home to whatever creatures lived there, reduced to stumps and luxury cabins for wealthy people from the city. "Can I think about it? Can I see the property first before making any decisions?" "Of course. That's why you're here." Mr. Whitmore stood, buttoning his jacket. "But, Mrs. Kellerman, I should tell you, the development company's offer expires in 30 days. After that, they're looking at other locations. And the county is getting impatient about those back taxes. You've got some decisions to make, and not much time to make them." The drive to Hollowridge took 20 minutes, following a 2-lane road that climbed into hills thick with trees. Mr. Whitmore drove a Cadillac that had been new sometime in the 90s, its leather seats worn to a comfortable sheen, its engine purring with the reliability of good maintenance. He pointed out landmarks as they went: the old Miller farm, the creek where kids used to swim before it got polluted, the spot where Route 6 used to run before they rerouted it in the 70s. Marie watched the landscape change as they climbed. The farms gave way to forest, thick and green and somehow darker than the woods she'd seen on the drive in. The trees here were older, their trunks massive, their canopies so dense that the sunlight came through and scattered coins of gold. There was a heaviness to these woods, a presence that made her skin prickle with awareness. "There," Mr. Whitmore said, pointing to a narrow dirt road that branched off to the right. A faded sign read, "Hollowridge, private property. This is where your land begins. The property line runs about a quarter mile on either side of the road for the next 3 miles. 3 miles. Marie tried to visualize it and failed. She had never owned anything that could be measured in miles. The road was rough, pocked with potholes, and overgrown with weeds that scraped the undercarriage of the Cadillac. Trees pressed in on both sides, their branches forming a tunnel of green that seemed to swallow them. The light grew dimmer, filtered through so many layers of leaves that it took on a greenish quality, like being underwater. Ethan had his face pressed to the window, his earlier excitement giving way to something more subdued. "Mom," he said quietly, "this place feels weird." She knew what he meant. There was a quality to the silence here that was different from ordinary quiet. It felt expectant, as if the forest itself was watching, waiting to see what these newcomers would do. The road opened suddenly into a clearing, and there it was, the house. Marie's breath caught. She'd been expecting something run down, maybe even derelict, but while the house was certainly old and showed signs of neglect, it was also magnificent in a way that made her chest ache. 3 stories of Victorian architecture, complete with a wraparound porch, gabled windows, and a turret on the eastern corner that rose like something from a fairy tale. The paint was peeling, gray where it had once been white, and several shutters hung at crooked angles. The yard was overgrown, wild roses and blackberry brambles fighting for space with tall grass that whispered in the breeze. But beneath the decay, she could see the bones of something beautiful, something that had been built with care and money and perhaps even love. A pickup truck was parked near the porch, and a man emerged from the shadows as they pulled up. He was perhaps 60, weathered in the way of people who worked outdoors, with a gray beard and eyes that were startlingly blue against his tanned face. He wore work clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt despite the summer heat, and carried himself with the careful posture of someone whose back had given him trouble. "Dale," Mr. Whitmore said, getting out of the car. "Thanks for meeting us." Dale Pritchard nodded, his gaze moving to Marie and Ethan as they emerged. There was something assessing in his look, but not unkind. "So you're Constance's kin," he said, and it wasn't quite a question. "Marie Kellerman, this is my son, Ethan." She extended her hand and Dale shook it with a grip that was firm, but not aggressive. "Didn't think anyone would come," Dale said simply. "Constance always said her family wanted nothing to do with this place." "I didn't know it existed until a few days ago. My mother never told me about Constance." Something flickered in Dale's expression. Understanding, maybe, or sympathy. Lots of secrets in families. Constance knew that better than most. He gestured toward the house. "You want to look inside?" The porch steps creaked under their weight, and Marie found herself holding her breath as Dale unlocked the front door. It swung open with a groan of hinges that hadn't been oiled in years, revealing an entrance hall that smelled of dust and time and something else, a faint sweetness, like dried flowers. The interior was dim, the windows too dirty to let in much light, but as Marie's eyes adjusted, she began to make out details that made her heart beat faster. Hardwood floors, though covered in dust. A staircase with an ornate banister that curved upward into shadow. Furniture draped in white sheets, creating ghost shapes in the gloom. And everywhere, the sense of a life paused rather than ended, as if Constance had simply stepped out for a moment and would return any second. "She didn't change much after Vincent disappeared," Dale said, his voice quiet in the heavy silence. "Kept everything the way he liked it, like a museum to a man who might have been a monster." Marie moved deeper into the house, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood. Ethan stayed close, his earlier bravado replaced by caution. Through a doorway to the left, she glimpsed what must have been a library. Floored-ceiling shelves, a leather chair, a reading lamp covered in cobwebs. To the right, a formal dining room with a table that could seat 12. "How big is this place?" she asked. 4,200 square feet, 4 bedrooms upstairs plus the turret room, full attic, basement that runs the length of the house. Marie tried to process this. The trailer they lived in was maybe 800 square feet. This house was more than 5 times that size. She could get lost here. They could all get lost here. "The bones are good," Dale said, following her gaze. "Foundation's solid, roof needs work in places, but it's not beyond saving. Plumbing's old but functional. Electrical is sketchy. I'd want an electrician to go through it before you tried living here. But it's not a teardown. It's a restoration." A restoration. The word felt both promising and overwhelming. Marie had never restored anything in her life. She'd patched and made do, fixed what was broken just enough to keep functioning. The idea of bringing something like this back to its former glory seemed as impossible as the $40,000 in debt. "Can we see the rest?" Ethan asked, his voice small in the vast space. They moved through the house room by room, Dale providing a running commentary on what needed attention. The kitchen was a nightmare of old appliances and water damage. The bathrooms were functional but ancient. The bedrooms upstairs were surprisingly intact, though the wallpaper was peeling and the carpet was moth-eaten in places. And everywhere there were signs of Constance's life. Photographs in frames, books with markers still in place, a knitting project abandoned on a chair. "She didn't change much after Vincent disappeared," Dale said, as they stood in what must have been the master bedroom. A large bed dominated the space, its posts carved with intricate designs. "I found her in the morning. She looked peaceful. I think she was ready to go." "Were you close?" Marie asked gently. Dale was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the forest beyond. "As close as she let anyone get. I did work for her over the years, repairs, maintenance, that sort of thing. Sometimes we'd talk. She'd tell me stories about the old days before Vincent disappeared. She loved him, you know. Despite everything he was, she loved him. Spent her whole life hoping he'd come back." "Do you think he's dead?" Ethan asked, and Marie winced at the bluntness of the question. But Dale didn't seem offended. "Oh, he's dead, boy. No question about that. Men like Vince and Holloway don't just walk away. They make enemies, and eventually those enemies catch up to him. The question isn't whether he's dead, it's where he's buried." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marie thought of the forest surrounding them, hundreds of acres where a body could be hidden and never found. She thought of Constance, living here alone for decades, walking these rooms and knowing, or suspecting, that her husband's remains were somewhere out there in the trees. "The turret room," Ethan said. "Can we see it?"
Dale and Mr. Whitmore exchanged a glance that Marie couldn't interpret. "The turret's been locked for years," Dale said slowly. "Constance kept the only key. We found it after she passed, but I haven't been up there. Didn't seem right somehow." "But it's part of the house," Ethan insisted, with the logic of youth. "We should see all of it." Dale sighed, pulling a ring of keys from his pocket. He sorted through them until he found an old brass key, tarnished with age. "All right, but be careful on the stairs. They're steep." The turret staircase was narrow and winding, the steps worn in the center where countless feet had climbed before them. The air grew staler as they ascended, and Marie felt a growing sense of unease. What had Constance kept locked away up here? What secrets had she protected, even from Dale, who seemed to have been her only friend? The door at the top was solid oak, with an old-fashioned keyhole. Dale fitted the key and turned it, and the lock clicked open with a sound like bones breaking. He pushed the door inward, and dust motes swirled in the shaft of light that entered. The turret room was circular, with windows that looked out in all directions over the forest. It should have been beautiful, a perfect space for reading or contemplation. But what made Marie's breath catch was what filled the space. Every surface was covered in newspaper clippings, photographs, maps. The walls were papered with them, overlapping like scales, connected by red string that formed a web of connections. Vincent Holloway's face stared out from dozens of photographs, a handsome man with dark eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. Articles about unsolved murders, about missing persons, about organized crime investigations. Maps of the forest with areas marked in red. And in the center of it all, a single photograph of Constance herself, young and beautiful, standing next to Vincent with an expression of such happiness it was almost painful to see. "My God," Mr. Whitmore breathed. She was investigating him. Marie moved closer, trying to make sense of the web of information. Here was an article about 3 men found dead in a warehouse in Philadelphia, their murder unsolved. A string connected it to Vincent's photograph. Here was a map with an X marked deep in the forest. Another string led to a photograph Marie didn't recognize. The entire room was a monument to obsession, to a woman who had spent decades trying to understand what her husband had been, what he had done, and perhaps where he had gone. And Ethan had moved to one of the windows, looking out over the forest canopy. "Mom," he said, his voice awed, "come look at this." Marie joined him, following his pointing finger. At first, she saw only trees. Then her eyes adjusted, and she realized what she was seeing. Deep in the forest, perhaps half a mile away, there was a structure. Not a house. Something smaller. A shed, maybe, or a cabin. It was almost hidden by the trees, but from this height, from this angle, it was just visible. "That's not on any of the property surveys," Mr. Whitmore said, coming to look. "I've never seen any structure marked on that part of the land." Dale's face had gone pale. "Constance asked me about that once, called it the other house, said Vincent built it before they were married, that it was his private place. She made me promise never to go looking for it. She was afraid of it. Whatever's out there, she didn't want anyone to find it." Marie felt cold despite the stuffiness of the room. The other house. Vincent's private place. She thought of the clippings on the walls,
the obsessive documentation of violence and mystery. She thought of $40,000 in debt and $200,000 from developers who wanted to tear it all down. And she thought of the forest, dark and deep and full of secrets that had been buried for more than half a century. "We need to go out there," Ethan said, his voice carrying that particular stubbornness that meant arguing would be useless. "We need to see what's in that building." "No," Marie said immediately. "Absolutely not. We're not going wandering through a forest where people have supposedly disappeared. We're going to go back to town. I'm going to think about all of this, and then we're going to make a rational decision." But even as she spoke, Marie knew she was lying. The hook was set, deep in her chest, pulling her toward that hidden structure. Because if there was something out there, something Vincent Holloway had built and Constance had feared, then maybe, just maybe, it held answers. Answers about why this property came with so much debt, why no one wanted it, why a woman had spent her entire life as a prisoner of love and mystery. And if there were answers, there might be a way forward, a way to keep the forest, to claim this impossible inheritance, to give her family something more than the hand-to-mouth existence they'd always known. Dale was shaking his head slowly. "If you're thinking of going out there, Mrs. Kellerman, you need to understand something. This forest, it's not like other woods. People have gotten lost here, experienced hunters, people who knew the land. There's something about Hollowridge that turns you around, makes you lose your sense of direction. Constance used to say the forest protects its secrets. I'm not a superstitious man, but I've lived here my whole life, and I'm telling you, that forest doesn't want to be understood."
Marie looked out the window at the endless green, at the hidden structure barely visible through the trees. She thought of Frank's voice on the phone. Something feels off about this. She thought of her mother, who had received the same letter and chosen never to respond, never to claim this legacy. She thought of Constance, who had loved a monster and spent her life chasing his ghost. And she thought of herself, Marie Kellerman, truck driver's wife, trailer park resident, woman who had never owned anything of substance in her entire life. Here was her chance to change that, but the price might be more than money. The price might be safety, sanity, peace. But when had she ever had those things anyway? "I want to see the property lines," she said, turning away from the window. "All of them. I want to understand what I'm dealing with before I make any decisions." Mr. Whitmore nodded slowly. "I can have survey maps drawn up. It'll take a few days." "That's fine. We're staying in town for the weekend anyway." Marie looked at Dale. "Can you meet us tomorrow morning? Take us on a tour of the accessible parts of the property?" Dale hesitated, then nodded. "I can do that. But Mrs. Kellerman, Marie, promise me something. Don't go into that forest alone. Don't go looking for that structure without proper preparation. Whatever Vincent Holloway was protecting out there, it's been hidden for over 50 years. Another few days won't matter." Marie promised, though the words felt hollow in her mouth, because she could already feel the pull of that mystery, the way it called to something deep in her bones. The same restless hunger that had driven Constance to paper a room with clues, the same desperate need to understand that had kept a woman prisoner in this house for decades. They descended from the turret in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they emerged onto the front porch, the forest seemed to press closer, its shadows deeper, its silence more profound. Marie took a deep breath of air that tasted of pine and earth, and something else, something old and secret and patient. Ethan was still buzzing with energy as they drove back to town, asking questions and making plans, but Marie barely heard him. Her mind was on that room full of clippings, on that hidden structure in the forest, on the weight of inheritance that came with more than land and lumber. She had come here looking for property. What she had found was a mystery that had consumed one life already and stood ready to consume another. The smart thing would be to walk away, to take the developer's money and run. But Marie had never been good at doing the smart thing. And somewhere in the darkness of Hollowridge Forest, Vincent Holloway's secrets were waiting. All she had to do was be brave enough or foolish enough to go looking. They spent that night in the Millbrook Motor Lodge, a relic from the 50s that clung to relevance through sheer stubbornness and lack of competition. The room smelled of bleach and old carpet, and the television only got 3 channels, but Ethan didn't complain. He was too busy sketching maps on the motel notepad, plotting routes through the forest to the hidden structure they'd seen from the turret window. Marie lay in the other double bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles and listening to the rhythm of her son's breathing as it slowly steadied into sleep. Her mind wouldn't quiet. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that room, the web of strings connecting photographs and articles, Constance's beautiful young face frozen in happiness next to a man who probably killed people. How many? The clippings suggest at least a dozen unsolved murders that might have been connected to Vincent Holloway. But the truth could be darker, deeper, buried in forest soil where no one would ever find it. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Frank. She grabbed it quickly, stepping into the bathroom so she wouldn't wake Ethan. "Hey," she whispered, closing the door. "You still up?" "Just pulled into a rest stop outside Kansas City. Wanted to check in before I crashed. How'd it go?" Marie sat on the closed toilet lid, suddenly overwhelmed by the need to tell him everything about the house, about Vincent Holloway, about the structure in the forest and the room full of obsession. The words tumbled out in a rush, and Frank listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she loved about him. He let people finish their thoughts before offering his own. When she finally stopped talking, there was a long silence. She could hear the hum of the rest stop through his phone, idling engines, the distant hiss of air brakes, the lonely sounds of the highway at night. "Marie," he said, finally. "Baby, I need you to listen to me. This sounds dangerous." "I know." "No, I don't think you do. A Mafia guy disappears, there are unsolved murders, and now there's some secret building in the woods that the widow was afraid of. That's not an adventure. That's a crime scene." "It was 60 years ago, Frank. Whatever happened there, whoever Vincent Holloway was, it's ancient history." "Is it? Because it sounds to me like Constance spent her whole life living with that history. It consumed her, Marie, and now you're talking about walking into the same woods looking for the same secrets. What do you think you're going to find out there?"
The question hung between them, electric with unspoken fears. Marie closed her eyes, trying to articulate what she felt. "I think I'm going to find out why this property came with $40,000 in debt. I think I'm going to find out why nobody wanted it, why my mother never responded to the lawyer's letters. And maybe I'm going to find something that makes this whole thing make sense. Or maybe you're going to find something that gets you hurt." Frank's sigh crackled through the speaker. "I can't talk you out of this, can I?" "No." "Then promise me something. Promise me you won't go into those woods without that caretaker, Dale, with you. And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you get out. You hear me? You grab Ethan and you drive away and you never look back." Maria promised, though the words felt like sand in her mouth. She knew herself well enough to recognize when she was making a commitment she might not keep. There was something in her that responded to mystery the way metal responded to magnets, an inexorable pull that overrode common sense. After she hung up, she stood in the bathroom for a long time, studying her reflection in the mirror. She looked tired, older than 36, the bathroom's fluorescent light casting shadows under her eyes that made her look haunted.
Was this what Constance had looked like in the years after Vincent disappeared? Had she stood in front of mirrors and watched herself age alone, waiting for a man who would never return? When Marie finally returned to bed, sleep came in fragments, broken pieces of dreams about forests and photographs, about strings connecting things that should never be connected, about a house that watched and waited and held its breath. Morning came too early and too bright. Ethan was already awake, dressed, his hair still wet from a shower he'd taken before she'd even opened her eyes. The energy radiating off him was almost visible, a restless excitement that made her own fatigue feel even heavier. "Dale texted," Ethan said, holding up her phone. "He'll meet us at the property at 9. Mom, we need to stop and get supplies first. Water, flashlights, maybe some rope." "We're not going spelunking, Ethan. We're taking a walk on the property with a guide." But even as she said it, Marie was mentally making her own list. Her phone had a compass app. She had a first aid kit in the car. There were granola bars in her bag. She told herself it was just being prepared, not planning anything reckless, but the distinction felt thin. They stopped at the hardware store on Main Street, Millbrook Hardware, established 1923, according to the faded sign. The owner was a woman in her 60s with suspicious eyes and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. She watched them as they gathered supplies. Flashlights, batteries, a length of rope, a machete that Marie told herself was for cutting through undergrowth but knew was really for protection against whatever she might find. "You're the Kellerman woman," the owner said, as Marie brought everything to the counter. It wasn't a question. In a town this small, news traveled faster than light. "I am." "Taken over the Holloway place?" The woman began ringing up items with methodical slowness. "Folks said someone would come eventually. Didn't expect it to be family." Marie waited, sensing there was more. Her hands paused on the machete, her fingers tracing the blade's edge without seeming to realize she was doing it. "You planning on going into those woods?" "Just walking the property lines." "Mm-hmm." The woman's eyes flicked to Ethan, then back to Marie. "Word of advice. Free of charge. You find anything out there, anything that doesn't seem right, you leave it be. Don't touch it. Don't try to understand it. Just walk away." "What kind of things?" Ethan asked, his voice pitched higher than usual.
The woman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Memory or fear. Marie couldn't tell which. "My brother went into those woods in 1982. Hunting trip. He came back 3 days later, walked right into town like nothing happened, but he was different. Wouldn't talk about where he'd been, what he'd seen. Started having nightmares. Within a year, he'd drunk himself to death." She finally looked away from them, back to the register. "That forest takes things from people. Makes them pay for being curious. You just remember that." They left with their supplies and the woman's warning hanging over them like a storm cloud. Marie noticed Ethan was quieter now, some of his excitement tempered by unease. Good, she thought. They needed to be careful. They needed to be smart about this. Dale was waiting when they arrived at the property, his truck parked in the same spot as yesterday. He'd brought his own supplies, a backpack that looked military surplus, a walking stick, and a hunting rifle that he carried with the casual ease of someone who'd been around firearms his whole life. "That necessary?" Marie asked, nodding at the rifle. "Black bears in these woods. Coyotes too, though they generally keep to themselves. And..." He paused, choosing his words. "If there are squatters on the property, old structures make good shelters for people who don't want to be found. Better to be prepared." They started walking, following what Dale said was an old logging road that had been abandoned decades ago. The forest closed around them quickly, the canopy so thick that the morning sunlight came through in scattered beams that looked almost solid, like pillars holding up the green ceiling. The air was different here, cooler, damper, thick with the scent of decomposing leaves and moss and something else Marie couldn't identify. Something wild and old and patient. Ethan stayed close at first, but as they walked, his confidence returned. He began ranging ahead, examining plants, picking up interesting rocks.
Marie wanted to call him back, but knew it would only make him feel smothered. Besides, Dale kept a casual eye on the boy, and there was something comforting about the caretaker's steady presence. How well did you know Constance? Really know her, I mean. Dale was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the forest with the automatic awareness of someone who'd spent a lifetime in wild places. Well enough to know she was carrying a burden nobody should have to carry. She loved Vincent. I think that was real. But she also knew what he was. Maybe not the details, but enough to understand that he'd done terrible things. After he disappeared, she spent years trying to find him, hired investigators, followed leads, talked to people who claimed they knew something. Nothing ever panned out. When did she stop looking? I don't think she ever did. Not really. She just shifted from looking for him to looking for evidence of what he'd done. Like if she could understand his crimes, she could understand why he'd left her. Dale pushed aside a branch, holding it so Marie could pass. That room you saw yesterday, the turret, she started building that collection maybe 20 years ago. It became her whole world. She'd barely leave the house except to go to the library, research things online. It was like she was building a case against the man she loved. Did she ever talk about the structure in the forest, the one we saw from the window? Dale's expression darkened. Once, it was maybe 5 years ago, not long after I'd started helping her with maintenance. She'd been drinking, unusual for her, and she got talking about Vincent. Said he'd built a workshop out in the forest before they were married, called it his private place. Said it was where he kept things he didn't want the world to see. Things? What kind of things? He wouldn't say. Got real upset, actually. Made me promise I'd never go looking for it. Never try to find it. Said some secrets were meant to stay buried. Dale stopped walking, turning to face Marie directly. I gave her that promise, but you didn't, and I have a feeling you're going to go looking no matter what I say. Marie met his gaze steadily. If there's something out there that explains why this property is buried in debt, why my family ran from this inheritance, I need to know what it is. Don't you understand? This could be the answer to everything. Or it could be the question that destroys you. Dale shook his head slowly. You remind me of her, Constance. That same stubborn need to understand, to dig into things that should be left alone. It didn't bring her peace, Marie. It brought her nothing but pain. Before Marie could respond, Ethan's voice rang out from ahead. Mom, come look at this! They found him standing at the edge of what looked like an old foundation, stones arranged in a rough rectangle, now mostly covered in moss and soil. Trees grew up through what must have once been a floor, their roots breaking apart the remaining structure with slow, inexorable strength. What was this? Ethan asked, his eyes bright with discovery.
Dale examined it, running his hand along one of the stones. Worker housing, probably. Back when this was a timber operation in the 20s and 30s, they had crews living on site. This would have been one of their cabins. Are there more? Scattered throughout the property. Most are completely reclaimed by the forest now. This one's in better shape than most. Dale straightened, looking around. We're about a mile from the main house now. The property extends another 2 miles in this direction. They continued walking, and Marie began to understand the true scale of what she'd inherited. The forest seemed endless, each turn revealing more of the same. Trees and undergrowth, the occasional remnant of human habitation slowly being swallowed by nature. It was beautiful in an overwhelming way, like staring at the ocean and realizing how small you were, how insignificant. They stopped for lunch near a stream that cut through the property, its water running clear over smooth stones. Marie sat on the fallen log while Ethan explored the stream bank, searching for minnows and crayfish. Dale unpacked sandwiches from his backpack. He'd brought enough for all of them, a thoughtfulness that touched her more than it probably should have. "Can I ask you something?" Marie said, accepting a sandwich.
Why did you help her? Constance, I mean. You said you weren't that close, but you were the one who found her when she died. You're the one who's been maintaining this property even though there's no one to pay you. Dale was quiet for a long time, watching the water flow past. My wife died 7 years ago. Cancer. After she passed, I didn't know what to do with myself. The house was too empty, the days too long. Constance gave me a purpose. She needed help, and I needed to be needed. Simple as that. I'm sorry about your wife. Me too. He took a bite of his sandwich, chewed thoughtfully. Thing is, helping Constance, being around her, it taught me something. Some people are haunted by the past in a way that makes the present impossible to live. She was trapped by what Vincent had done, by what he might have been, by all the unanswered questions. Don't make the same mistake, Marie. Don't let this place trap you too. But Marie could already feel the hooks setting deeper. Every tree, every ruined foundation, every shadow in this forest felt like it was pulling her towards something inevitable. She thought of the turret room, of the strings connecting mysteries to maybes, of Constance spending decades chasing ghosts. Was that her future too? Would she end up like her distant aunt, consumed by the need to understand? They finished lunch and continued their exploration. The forest grew denser as they went, the underbrush thicker, the trees older and more massive. Dale pointed out property markers, old stones with faded markings, rusted metal posts that had been placed decades ago. The boundaries of her land, the edges of her inheritance. It was mid-afternoon when Ethan called out again. They had been walking for hours, and Marie's feet ached, her shirt stuck to her back with sweat. But something in her son's voice made her forget the discomfort. Not excitement this time. Something else. Fear, maybe. Or shock. They found him standing at the base of an enormous oak tree, its trunk so wide that 3 people couldn't have circled it with joined hands. But that wasn't what had stopped Ethan. Built into the tree, perhaps 20 feet up, was a structure. Rough boards forming walls and a roof. A makeshift ladder of planks nailed to the trunk, leading upward. A treehouse, Marie breathed. But Dale was shaking his head. No, a deer stand. Hunters use them. This one's old, though. Has to be 30, 40 years at least. Nobody's maintained it. Ethan's eyes were locked on the structure. Can I go up? Absolutely not, Marie said immediately. Those boards are probably rotted through. But Ethan was already moving toward the ladder, drawn by the same curiosity that Marie felt burning in her own chest. What was up there? Who built it? And why here, in this particular spot, so deep in the forest? Ethan, stop! Marie's command rang through the trees, sharp with authority. Ethan froze, one hand on the ladder. Dale moved forward, examining the structure more carefully. He tested the first rung with his weight, then the second. Actually, seems pretty solid. Whoever built this knew what they were doing. He looked up at the treehouse, then back at Marie. I can check it out, see if there's anything up there. Why would there be anything up there? But even as Marie asked the question, she knew the answer. Because Vincent Holloway built structures in this forest. Because he kept secrets. Because nothing about this inheritance was simple or straightforward. Dale climbed slowly, testing each rung before putting his full weight on it. Marie held her breath, watching him ascend. When he reached the platform, he disappeared for a moment, and she heard the sound of wood scraping against wood. Then his head appeared over the edge. There's something up here, he called down. Some kind of box. It's locked. Marie's heart hammered. Bring it down.
It's heavy, and I don't want to risk. His words cut off abruptly. Even from the ground, Marie could see his expression change. Jesus Christ! What? What is it? Dale didn't answer immediately. He was looking at something she couldn't see, his face pale even in the dappled sunlight. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, strained, shocked. There are bones up here. Human bones. The world seemed to tilt. Marie gripped the tree trunk for support, her mind racing. Human bones. In a treehouse on her property, in a forest where Vincent Holloway had kept secrets and Constance had lived in fear. Are you sure?
Her voice sounded far away, like someone else was speaking. "I'm sure." Dale's voice was grim. "Looks like a skeleton, most of it anyway. Been here a long time. The bones are clean, weathered." Ethan had gone pale, backing away from the tree. Marie wanted to comfort him, but couldn't make herself move. Human remains. This wasn't just a mystery anymore. This was a crime scene, maybe. This was evidence of something terrible that had happened here, something that had been hidden for decades. "We need to call the police," Marie said, her voice shaking slightly. "Right now. We need to—" Wait. Dale was moving around up there, and she heard more sounds. Something being shifted, the creak of old boards. There's something else. A notebook, wrapped in plastic. And the box I mentioned. It's not locked, I was wrong. It's just rusted shut. "Dale, don't touch anything else. This is a crime scene. We need to—" "Marie." His voice cut through her panic, steady and commanding. "I'm coming down, and we need to look at what's in this notebook before we call anyone. Trust me on this." He descended carefully, carrying a package wrapped in what looked like heavy plastic sheeting, yellowed with age. Under his other arm was a metal box, about the size of a large toolbox, its surface covered in rust and corrosion. When he reached the ground, his expression was unreadable. "What did you find?" Marie asked. Instead of answering, Dale unwrapped the plastic carefully. Inside was a spiral notebook, the kind students used in school. The cover was water-stained but intact, and across it, in faded ink, were 3 words: "Vincent's insurance policy." Marie's hands trembled as she opened it. The first page was a list of names, dates, and amounts. The second page was more names, more dates. As she flipped through, her stomach began to sink. This wasn't just a record. This was a ledger. Every entry detailed a transaction, a deal, a payment. But mixed in with what looked like legitimate business were other entries, darker ones. Chicago problem handled, $50,000. Witness eliminated, $25,000. Collection from Rossi, $100,000. Permanent solution applied. This was Vincent Holloway's record of his crimes, a meticulous accounting of every murder, every threat, every act of violence he committed or arranged. And at the back of the notebook, a statement written in the same careful hand. "To whoever finds this, this is my life insurance. If I disappear, if I'm killed, this information goes to the FBI. Every name here, every crime, every person involved. They won't touch me, because touching me destroys them all." But someone had touched him. Someone had made him disappear. And this insurance policy had stayed hidden, buried in a treehouse in a forest that protected its secrets. "The box," Dale said quietly. "You need to see what's in the box." Marie's hands shook as she tried to pry it open. The rust resisted at first, then gave way with a shriek of metal on metal. The lid came free, and she stared at the contents, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Money. Stacks and stacks of bills, packed tight. But not just any bills. These were old, some dating back to the 60s and 70s. And mixed in with the cash were other things. Jewelry, rings, necklaces, watches, all expensive looking. Coins that gleamed gold even through the patina of age. And at the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, something that made her gasp. Bars of gold. Small ones, each about the size of a cell phone, but heavy. So heavy. "How much is here?" Ethan whispered, his eyes wide. Dale was already calculating, his face grim. The cash alone, if it's all hundreds and twenties like it looks, could be anywhere from $2 to $5 million. The jewelry? Hard to say without having it appraised. And the gold, he lifted one of the bars, testing its weight. These are 1 kilo bars. Gold's trading around $60,000 an ounce right now. Each of these is worth maybe $70,000, $80,000. There are, he counted quickly, 30 of them, maybe more underneath. Marie's mind went blank. then flooded with too many thoughts at once. Millions of dollars. Hidden in a treehouse on her property, along with evidence of crimes spanning decades, and human remains that might belong to Vincent Holloway himself or one of his victims. "We can't call the police," Dale said, reading her thoughts. "You understand that, right? The second we do, all of this becomes evidence. The money, the gold, it all gets seized. And that notebook? That's going to open up investigations into murders that are older than you are. There'll be families asking questions, media attention, maybe even people from Vincent's old organization coming around to see what you found." "We have to," Marie said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Those are human remains. Someone died here. Someone's family deserves to know." "Someone who was probably involved with Vincent's crimes," Dale countered. "Look at where we are. Deep in the forest, in a structure that Vincent built. This wasn't some innocent victim. This was someone connected to his operation. Someone who either betrayed him or knew too much." Marie looked at Ethan, who was staring at the money with an expression she couldn't read. Horror and fascination mixed together the same way she was feeling. This fortune, because that's what it was, a genuine fortune, could solve every problem they had, pay off the property debts, set Ethan up for college, give them a life they'd never dared to dream of. But it came with blood on it. It came with death and secrets and crimes that had been hidden for decades. "Mom," Ethan said softly, "what are we going to do?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Marie thought of Frank, of his steady voice telling her to walk away if anything felt wrong. This was wrong. Objectively, morally wrong. Taking this money would make them complicit in hiding evidence, in concealing crimes, in benefiting from violence. But $40,000 in debt would destroy them. The developers would tear down the forest, turn it into luxury cabins, erase whatever history was here. And this money, this blood money, had been sitting here for decades, doing nothing, helping no one. "We take it," Marie heard herself say. "We take the money and the gold. We leave the notebook and the bones exactly where they are. And we don't tell anyone about this. Not yet. Not until I figure out what to do." "Marie," Dale started. "I'm not saying forever. I'm saying I need time to think, to understand what this means, to figure out—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish. To figure out how to live with herself? To figure out how to justify profiting from someone's death? To figure out how to transform blood money into a better life for her family? Dale studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but we need to be smart about this. We take the box, we reseal the treehouse, we don't come back here, and we definitely don't tell anyone, not the lawyer, not anyone in town. You understand? The second word gets out that there's money on this property, you'll have treasure hunters and worse crawling all over these woods." They worked quickly, repacking the box, wrapping it in Dale's jacket to hide it. Dale climbed back up to replace the notebook and reseal the platform as best he could. Marie helped Ethan gather branches to obscure the ladder, to make the treehouse less visible from the ground. Every moment felt surreal, like she was watching herself from outside her own body, seeing some other Marie Kellerman make choices that the real Marie would never make. But she was making them. And even as guilt twisted in her stomach, even as she knew Frank would be horrified, even as she understood she was crossing a line she couldn't uncross, she didn't stop. The walk back to the main house felt eternal. The box was heavy, awkward to carry, and they took turns. Ethan was quiet now, all his earlier excitement drained away. He'd seen something today that changed him, Marie realized. Her son had looked at death and wealth and been forced to understand they were sometimes the same thing. When they finally emerged from the forest into the clearing where the house stood, the late afternoon sun was slanting across the overgrown lawn. Dale loaded the box into his truck, covering it with a tarp. "What now?" he asked. Marie's phone buzzed. A text from Frank. "Made good time. Should be home tonight instead of Tuesday. Can't wait to hear how it went. Love you." She stared at the message, her throat tight. Frank would be home tonight. She'd have to look him in the eye and lie about what they'd found. Or tell him the truth and watch him insist they turn everything over to the police. Either way, their life was about to change in ways she couldn't predict. "Now?" Marie said, looking at the house that had been built with stolen money, that held the ghost of a woman who spent her life chasing answers. "Now I figure out how to live with what we just did." Dale gripped her shoulder briefly. "For what it's worth, I don't think you made the wrong choice. Constance would have wanted someone to benefit from all this. Better you than some developer bulldozing the forest or the government seizing it as evidence, or Vincent's old associates coming to claim it." But his words rang hollow. Marie knew what she'd done. She'd looked at human remains, someone's child, someone's family member, and decided her need was greater than their right to justice. She'd chosen money over morality, practicality over principles. And the worst part? She wasn't sure she regretted it.
The drive back to the motel was silent. Ethan stared out the window, and Marie gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. The box sat in Dale's truck, heading to his house where he'd hide it until Marie figured out what to do. $3 million, maybe more. Enough to change everything. Enough to destroy everything. That night, in the motel room, Ethan finally spoke. "Mom, those bones, do you think they were Vincent?" Marie sat on the edge of his bed, smoothing his hair back from his forehead the way she had when he was small. "I don't know, baby. But if they are, if Vincent's been dead all this time, then Constance waited for nothing. She spent her whole life waiting for someone who was never coming back." The observation was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Marie pulled her son close, holding him the way she wished someone could hold her. "Sometimes people hold on to hope, even when hope is gone. It's not about logic. It's about love." "Is that what you're doing? With the money? Holding on to hope?" Marie pulled back to look at him. His eyes, Frank's eyes, were searching her face for answers she didn't have. "I'm trying to give us a chance. That's all. A chance at something better." "Even if it's wrong?" The question pierced her. How did she explain to a 12-year-old that morality was more complicated than right and wrong, that sometimes you had to compromise your principles to survive, that the world wasn't divided into good people and bad people, but rather people trying to do their best with impossible choices? "Even if it's wrong," she whispered. "God help me, even if it's wrong." Ethan nodded slowly, processing this. Then he said something that made Marie's blood run cold. "Dad's gonna know. The second he looks at you, he's gonna know something happened." He was right. Frank could read her like a book, could see through every lie she'd ever tried to tell. How was she gonna hide this from him? How was she gonna look into those honest, tired eyes and pretend she hadn't just committed what might be multiple felonies? Her phone rang. Frank. For a moment, she considered not answering, but that would only make things worse. "Hey," she said, trying to sound normal. "You make it home?" "Just pulled in. Place is too quiet without you two."
His voice was warm, affectionate. "Tell me about the property. Was it worth the drive?" And so Marie told him, but she edited as she went, creating a version of the truth that left out tree houses and bones and fortunes hidden in the forest. She told him about the house, about Dale, about the weight of debt and the developer's offer. She made it sound like a difficult decision, but a manageable one, a puzzle they could solve together. She lied to her husband, and with each word, each careful omission, she felt something inside her shift. The Marie who'd driven to Pennsylvania 3 days ago wouldn't have done this. But that Marie was gone, replaced by someone who'd looked at millions of dollars and decided it was worth any price. Her phone rang. Frank. For a moment, she considered not answering, but that would only make things worse. "Hey," she said, trying to sound normal. "You make it home." "Just pulled in. Place is too quiet without you two." His voice was warm, affectionate. "Tell me about the property. Was it worth the drive?" And so Marie told him, but she edited as she went, creating a version of the truth that left out tree houses and bones and fortunes hidden in the forest. She told him about the house, about Dale, about the weight of debt and the developer's offer. She made it sound like a difficult decision, but a manageable one, a puzzle they could solve together. She lied to her husband, and with each word, each careful omission, she felt something inside her shift. The Marie who'd driven to Pennsylvania 3 days ago wouldn't have done this. But that Marie was gone, replaced by someone who'd looked at millions of dollars and decided it was worth any price. When she hung up, Frank was watching her. "You didn't tell him?" "Not yet. I will, when the time is right." "When will that be?" Marie didn't answer because she didn't know. Maybe never. Maybe when the money was safely laundered and deposited and spent. Maybe when it was too late for Frank to make her do the right thing. She turned off the light and lay in the darkness, listening to her son's breathing slow and steady. Outside, the night pressed against the windows. And somewhere in the forest, her forest, secrets waited. Secrets about Vincent Holloway, about Constance, about violence and wealth and the price people paid for both. Marie had thought inheriting the forest would solve her problems. Instead, she'd discovered that every solution came with new complications, that every answer raised more questions, and that the line between victim and criminal was thinner than she'd ever imagined. Tomorrow, she'd have to face Frank. She'd have to decide what to do with the fortune in Dale's possession. She'd have to live with the knowledge that somewhere in those woods, bones remained undiscovered, a person remained unidentified, and justice remained unserved. But tonight, in this anonymous motel room, Marie let herself imagine a different future, one where Ethan went to a good college, where Frank didn't have to drive endless miles to make ends meet, where they had a home, a real home that belonged to them completely. It was a beautiful dream, and it was built on a foundation of death. Marie closed her eyes and waited for sleep that wouldn't come, while in the forest, the trees kept their secrets, and the bones in the treehouse waited for someone who might never come looking. The morning they left Millbrook, rain fell in sheets that turned the world gray and indistinct. Marie drove with both hands locked on the wheel, her eyes fixed on the road as wipers beat their rhythmic confession against the windshield. Ethan slept in the passenger seat, exhausted from a night of restless dreams. She'd heard him talking in his sleep, fragments of sentences about bones and money and trees that watched. Her son was carrying this secret now, too, and the weight of it showed in the dark circles under his eyes and the way his shoulders hunched forward even when he slept. They'd left Dale's house an hour before dawn. The box was wrapped in layers of plastic and hidden in a false bottom of the Honda's trunk. a modification Dale had insisted on making the night before, staying up until 2 in the morning with tools and wood and the grim determination of someone who'd crossed a line and needed to make sure the crossing was complete. The fortune was traveling with them now, hidden beneath a layer of carpet and spare tire, invisible to anyone who didn't know to look. "You call me when you get home," Dale had said as they'd loaded the car. His face looked older in the porch light, lined with worry and something else. Complicity, maybe, or shared guilt. "And Marie, be careful who you trust with this. Vincent's associates, some of them might still be around. Old men, maybe, but dangerous old men. They find out about that notebook, about what Vincent kept records of. They'll come looking." The words had sent ice down her spine, but she'd nodded, promised to be careful, and driven away with secrets worth millions and danger she couldn't measure. The Pennsylvania hills gave way to familiar highways, and with each mile that passed, Marie felt the weight of what she'd done pressing harder against her chest. She'd stolen evidence from a crime scene. She'd hidden what might be murder from the authorities. She'd decided that her family's needs outweighed justice for someone who died decades ago. And now she had to look Frank in the eye and pretend everything was fine. They stopped once for gas and coffee, a rest stop somewhere in Ohio where the fluorescent lights buzzed and the air smelled of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. While Ethan was in the bathroom, Marie pulled out her phone and found herself scrolling through news articles about cold cases, about families still searching for missing loved ones from the 60s and 70s. She wondered if the bones in that treehouse belonged to someone's father, someone's son. She wondered if there were people still alive who'd spent 50 years waiting for answers she could provide, but had chosen not to. The guilt was overwhelming, a physical thing that made her hands shake as she lifted her coffee cup. But beneath it, shamefully, was something else, a dark excitement that came from knowing she had $3 million hidden in her trunk, $3 million that could change everything, that would change everything. Her phone buzzed, a text from Frank. "Can't wait to see you both. Made your favorite for dinner. Drive safe." The message was so normal, so full of uncomplicated love, that Marie felt tears burning behind her eyes. Frank deserved better than this. Better than a wife who'd become a criminal, who'd looked at a corpse and seen an opportunity rather than a tragedy. But she'd made her choice, and there was no going back. They pulled into their driveway just after 5 that evening. The trailer looked smaller than Marie remembered, more cramped, more temporary. Frank's truck was parked in its usual spot, and through the window she could see him moving around the kitchen, probably checking on whatever he'd made for dinner. He looked so solid, so dependable, so fundamentally good that Marie almost couldn't make herself get out of the car. Ethan stirred, blinking awake. "We're home? We're home." He rubbed his eyes, looking at the trailer with an expression Marie couldn't quite read. "It looks different now, smaller. It's the same as it's always been." "No," Ethan said quietly. "We're different, so everything else looks different too." The wisdom in those words, the terrible, premature wisdom of a child forced to grow up too fast, made Marie's throat tight. She reached over and squeezed his hand. "We're going to be okay. All of us. I promise." But as she said it, she wondered if it was a promise she could keep. Frank met them at the door, his face breaking into a grin that made him look 10 years younger. He swept Marie into a hug that lifted her off her feet, then grabbed Ethan in a bear hug that made the boy squirm and laugh. "God, I missed you too. Tell me everything. Tell me about the house, the forest, all of it." They sat around the small dining table while Frank served spaghetti and garlic bread, and Marie told the edited version of their trip. She described the house's Victorian beauty, the scale of the forest, the weight of decision she was facing. She talked about Dale, about Mr. Whitmore, and the development company's offer. She made it sound complicated but manageable, a puzzle they could solve together. What she didn't mention were the bones, the notebook, or the fortune currently hidden in their car trunk. "So what are you thinking about the property?"
Marie pushed spaghetti around her plate, not trusting herself to meet his eyes. "I don't know yet. The developer's offer is good money, but it feels wrong, like I'd be betraying something. And the debts, $40,000. It's not impossible to raise if we can get a loan against the property value." "What about that caretaker?
Dale, he seemed solid? Frank's question was casual, but Marie heard the concern underneath. He was trying to assess whether she'd been safe, whether the people she'd encountered were trustworthy. He was good, knew the property well, cared about Constance. All true statements, Marie told herself, just incomplete ones. Ethan had been quiet throughout dinner, pushing food around his plate, much like Marie. Now he looked up, and Marie saw the conflict in his eyes, the 12-year-old's instinct to tell the truth warring with the understanding that some truths were too dangerous to speak. "Ethan?" Frank said, noticing. "You okay, buddy? You've been quiet." "Just tired. It was a lot of walking. The forest is really big. Find anything interesting out there?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Marie's heart hammered, but Ethan's expression didn't change. "Some old foundations, places where people used to live. Dale said it was timber operation housing from the 20s. The lie came out smooth, practiced. When had her son learned to deceive so easily? Marie felt sick. After dinner, Frank helped Marie unload the car while Ethan went to his room. Frank carried the bags, and Marie popped the trunk, her heart racing as she watched him reach for their luggage. The false bottom was invisible unless you knew to look for it, but still every moment felt like exposure, like discovery. "Heavy trip, huh?" Frank grunted, lifting a bag. "Feels like you brought back rocks." "Just some samples, wood, stones. Thought they might help with understanding the property." More lies, stacking up like stones, building a wall between them. Frank closed the trunk without examining it further, and Marie exhaled slowly. The fortune remained hidden. The secret remained safe. And she remained a liar. That night, lying in bed next to Frank, Marie stared at the ceiling and listened to his breathing slow into sleep. She thought about waking him, telling him everything, letting him decide what to do. Frank was good at decisions, at weighing options, at choosing the right path even when it was hard. If she told him, he'd know what to do. He'd make it right. But she couldn't, because she already knew what he'd say. Frank would insist they turn the money over to the police, that they report the remains, that they do the right thing regardless of the cost. And the right thing would cost them everything: the property, the chance at a better life, maybe even their freedom if authorities decided they'd tried to conceal evidence. So Marie lay in the darkness and held her secrets close, feeling them eat away at her from the inside like acid. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. Marie was making coffee when her phone rang, Mr. Whitmore's name on the screen. "Mrs. Kellerman." His voice was tight, worried. "We have a situation. Can you talk?" Marie's stomach dropped. "What kind of situation?" "There's been some interest in the property. Beyond the developers, I mean. A man came to my office yesterday afternoon, just after you'd left town. Said he was a historian researching the Holloway family. Wanted to know about the property layout, about whether Constance had ever mentioned hiding places or secret locations, about whether Vincent had ever built structures in the forest." Marie's blood ran cold. Dale's warning echoed in her mind. Vincent's associates. Some of them might still be around. Old men, maybe, but dangerous old men. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing specific. Said I couldn't discuss client matters. But here's the thing. After he left, I did some checking. Robert Carlyle is a real historian, teaches at Penn State. But when I called the university, they said he's been on sabbatical in Europe for the past 6 months. Whoever came to my office, he was using a stolen identity." Marie gripped the counter for support. Someone was looking for something on the property. Someone who knew enough about Vincent to ask the right questions, to reference secret structures and hiding places. Someone who might know about the treehouse, the notebook, the fortune. "Mrs. Kellerman, are you there?" "I'm here. Did he say anything else? Give any indication of what he was really looking for?" "He asked if you'd taken possession yet, when you might be moving in, whether you plan to sell." A pause. "Marie, I think you should be very careful. If this man comes around again, don't engage with him. Call the police immediately." After she hung up, Marie stood in the kitchen for a long time, the coffee forgotten, her mind spinning. Someone knew, or suspected, or had pieced together enough to come looking. The secret she thought was buried in a forest 60 years ago was trying to claw its way back to the surface. Frank found her standing there, her coffee cold, her expression blank. "Marie, what's wrong?" And suddenly, looking at his concerned face, at the man who'd been her anchor for 14 years, Marie couldn't hold it anymore. The weight of the secret, the fear of discovery, the guilt over the lies, it all came crashing down. "Frank, I need to tell you something, and you're going to be angry and you're going to be disappointed, and I don't blame you, but I need you to listen to the whole thing before you say anything. Can you do that?" His expression shifted, concern giving way to something more serious. He pulled out a chair, sat down, and nodded. "Tell me." So Marie told him. Everything. The treehouse, the bones, the notebook detailing Vincent's crimes, the fortune hidden beneath their car's false bottom. She told him about the choice she'd made, about Ethan witnessing it all, about Dale helping them hide the evidence. She told him about her justifications, the debts, the future she wanted for them, the belief that the victim had probably been a criminal themselves. And she told him about the fear that now consumed her, the knowledge that someone was looking for what they'd found. Frank listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When she finished, silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, he spoke. "How much?" "What?" "The money, the gold, all of it. How much is it worth?" Marie swallowed. "Dale estimated $3 million, maybe more." Frank stood up, walked to the window, stared out at nothing. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clenched into fists. When he turned back, his eyes held something she'd never seen there before. Not anger exactly, but something colder. Calculation. "Show me." They went out to the car, and Marie opened the trunk, revealing the false bottom. Frank stared at it for a long moment, then reached down and pulled it open. Even though she'd described it, seeing his reaction to the fortune, the stacks of money, the gold bars gleaming in the morning light, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "Jesus Christ, Marie, do you understand what you've done?" I know it was wrong. Wrong doesn't begin to cover it. You've made us accessories to hiding evidence of what might be murder. You've stolen what could be evidence in multiple unsolved crimes. And now someone's looking for it. Someone dangerous enough to use a fake identity. He closed the trunk hard. "We need to turn this over to the police. Right now, today." "Frank, please, just listen." He did listen. "I listened to you explain how you looked at a corpse and decided it was worth less than our debt. How you dragged our son into becoming a criminal. How you lied to me for days." His voice was rising, and Marie glanced at the trailer, praying Ethan couldn't hear her. "I did it for us," she said, knowing how hollow it sounded. "For our family, for a chance at something better." At what cost? Frank's eyes were blazing now. "Our integrity? Our safety? What happens when this Robert Carlyle finds out we have what he's looking for? What happens when Vincent's old associates come knocking? Did you think about that? Did you think about putting Ethan in danger?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. She hadn't thought about that. Not really. She'd been so focused on the opportunity, on the escape from poverty, that she hadn't considered the predators the fortune might attract. "We can hide it," she said, desperately. "Move it somewhere safer. The property, there's 300 acres. We could bury it somewhere no one would find it. We could what? Spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders? Wondering if every stranger is someone from Vincent's past? Teaching our son that morality is optional as long as the price is right?" Frank shook his head. "That's not the man I want to be. And it's not the mother you should want to be." Marie felt tears burning. "You don't understand. That $40,000 in debt will never pay it off. Never. The property will go to auction. The developers will bulldoze the forest and we'll have nothing. This money is our only chance." "At what? A life built on someone else's death? On crimes we're helping hide?" Frank's voice softened slightly, but the disappointment in it was worse than his anger. "Marie, I love you, but I can't do this. I won't." "So what? You're going to turn us in? Send me to prison? Send Ethan to foster care while we both rot in jail for hiding evidence?" Frank was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I honestly don't know." He started walking back toward the trailer, then stopped. "But I know this. Whatever that money is worth, it's not worth losing who we are. And if you can't see that, then maybe you've already lost it." He went inside, leaving Marie standing in the driveway with the trunk still open, the fortune still hidden, and her marriage possibly shattered beyond repair. The rest of the day passed in terrible silence. Frank barely spoke to her, spending most of his time in their bedroom with the door closed. Ethan sensed the tension and retreated to his own room, emerging only for meals that were eaten in silence, heavy with unsaid words. Marie tried to work through solutions in her mind. They could hide the fortune, tell no one, and wait until the mysterious Robert Carlyle gave up his search. They could use small amounts of the cash, slowly, carefully, over years. They could sell the gold gradually, through different dealers, never enough to raise suspicion. They could make it work. But each scenario played out in her imagination with the same ending: discovery, arrest, their family destroyed. Frank was right. This money was poisoned. Touching it had corrupted them, and holding on to it would only make things worse. Yet the alternative was unbearable. Turning the money over meant questions they couldn't answer, investigations they couldn't control. It meant losing the property to debt, losing their chance at anything better. It meant accepting that their life would always be this, paycheck to paycheck, one crisis away from disaster, trapped in a cycle they couldn't break. As darkness fell, Marie found herself in Ethan's room. He was lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling, and he didn't look at her when she entered. "Your father's really angry," she said softly. "He should be. What we did was wrong." Ethan's voice was flat, emotionless. "I know that now. I knew it then too, but I was excited about the money, about what it could mean. But Dad's right. It's not worth it." Marie sat on the edge of his bed. "Baby, I was trying to give you a better future. By stealing? By hiding someone's body?" He finally looked at her, and the judgment in his eyes was crushing. "Mom, whoever that person was up in that treehouse, they had a family too. Someone is waiting for them to come home, even after all these years. And we just left them there. We decided they didn't matter as much as we do." The words echoed what Marie had been trying not to think about for days. "Sometimes the world isn't fair," she said weakly. "No." Ethan sat up, and there was steel in his voice that reminded her achingly of Frank. "Sometimes you have to choose between what's easy and what's right. And you chose what was easy. We all did." Her son's words broke something in her, some last defense she'd been clinging to. He was right. Frank was right. What she'd done, what they'd done, was indefensible. Not because the money was stolen or the victim was possibly criminal, but because she'd decided that her needs outweighed justice, that her future mattered more than someone's past. She'd become the kind of person she'd always despised, and worse, she turned her son into an accomplice. She stood, her decision crystallizing with painful clarity. "I'm going to make this right. I don't know how yet, but I am." She found Frank in their bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. When she entered, he looked up, and the exhaustion in his face made her heart ache. "I'm sorry. You're right. About all of it. The money is poisoned.
Keeping it would poison us, too. We have to turn it over. Frank's expression shifted through several emotions: relief, sadness, something that might have been pride. It won't be easy. There'll be questions, maybe charges. The property might be seized as part of the investigation.
I know, but it's the right thing to do. Marie moved to sit beside him, not touching, not sure she had the right. I was so focused on what that money could give us that I forgot who we are, who I want to be, who I want Ethan to become. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over and took her hand. The gesture was so simple, so familiar, yet so profoundly forgiving that tears spilled down Marie's cheeks. "We'll get through this," he said. "Together. Whatever happens, we'll face it as a family." "What if they arrest me? What if—" "Then we'll deal with it. But Marie, you need to understand something. If we do this, if we turn everything over, we're not just giving up the money. We're accepting that we might lose the property too, that we might end up exactly where we started, or worse." Marie nodded, the weight of it settling on her shoulders. "I know, but keeping that money would cost us more. It would cost us everything that actually matters." They called Dale first. He answered on the second ring, his voice wary. "Marie?" "Dale, we're turning it over. The money, the notebook, everything. We're calling the police tomorrow morning and telling them what we found." Silence on the other end. Then, "You sure about this?" "No, but it's what we have to do." Another pause. "I respect that. But you need to know, I helped you hide it. I modified your car. I'm implicated too. I'll tell them I forced you, that you were just trying to help a grieving heir who wasn't thinking straight." "Marie!" "Dale, you've been nothing but good to me, to Constance. I'm not dragging you down with my mistakes." She could hear him breathing on the other end, weighing options. "All right, but I'll tell the truth about my part. I made choices too, and I own them. When are you calling?" "Tomorrow morning, first thing." "I'll come over. Drive up tonight. We should all be together when the police arrive. Tell a consistent story. And Marie, that Robert Carlyle character, if he's looking for the money, turning it over might actually protect you. Can't steal what you don't have." After they hung up, Marie sat with Frank and Ethan at their tiny dining table and explained what would happen. In the morning, they'd called the Pennsylvania State Police. They'd explain about the treehouse, the remains, the fortune. They'd surrender everything: the notebook, the money, the gold. They'd face whatever consequences came from hiding evidence, from making the choices they'd made. Ethan listened quietly, then asked, "What about the person, the bones? Will their family finally know what happened to them?" "I hope so. If they can be identified, if there's family still alive, yes, they'll know." "That's good," Ethan said softly. "That's the most important part, isn't it? Not the money, just knowing." Frank reached across the table and gripped his son's shoulder. "That's exactly right, buddy. Knowing is worth more than any fortune." That night, Marie barely slept. She kept thinking about Constance, about a woman who'd spent her life chasing the truth about a man who'd disappeared. What would Constance think about what Marie had found? About the notebook that documented Vincent's crimes, the fortune he hidden, the evidence that might finally explain what had happened to him. She thought about Vincent, too. A murderer, a criminal, but also a man who'd been loved, who'd married Constance and built her a house in the forest, who'd kept meticulous records as insurance, a way to protect himself from the very people he worked with. Those records might finally bring justice to victims whose families had waited decades for answers.
And she thought about herself, about Marie Kellerman, who'd come to Pennsylvania looking for an inheritance and found instead a test of character she almost failed, who'd looked at millions of dollars and seen freedom, only to realize that some prices were too high to pay. Dale arrived just before dawn, his truck pulling into the driveway as the first light touched the horizon. He looked tired, older, but his eyes were clear. He'd made peace with his choices, Marie realized. He'd accepted the consequences, whatever they might be. "Are you ready for this?" he asked as Marie let him in.
No, but we're doing it anyway.
Now? Frank pulled his son close. Now we wait. The investigation will take time. There might be charges, might not be. The property might be seized, might not be. We don't know yet. But at least we can sleep at night, Marie added. At least we can look at each other without lies between us. Dale nodded slowly. Constance would be glad, I think. She spent her whole life looking for truth. You found it and gave it away. That takes courage. Or stupidity, Marie said with a weak laugh. Sometimes they're the same thing. Dale headed to his truck, then paused. For what it's worth, Marie, you did the right thing. Not just for yourself, for whoever that person was in the treehouse, for their family, for justice. After he drove away, the three of them stood in the fading light, processing everything that had happened. Marie thought about the treehouse, about the bones that would finally be recovered and identified. She thought about families who might finally get answers, about crimes that might finally be solved. She thought about Vincent Holloway's insurance policy, bringing justice decades after his death. And she thought about herself, about a woman who'd been offered a fortune and learned what price she was willing to pay for her soul. Mom, Ethan said quietly, are we going to be okay? Marie looked at her son, at her husband, at the cramped trailer that was their home. They might lose the property, they might face charges, they might have nothing but each other and the knowledge that they'd chosen right over easy. Yeah, she said, and meant it. Yeah, baby, we're going to be okay. Because sometimes being okay wasn't about money or property or inherited fortunes. Sometimes it was about looking in the mirror and recognizing the person staring back. Sometimes it was about teaching your son that character mattered more than comfort. Sometimes it was about learning that the most valuable inheritance was integrity, and the richest fortune was the ability to sleep at night knowing you'd done the right thing. The forest kept its secret still, dark, and deep. But Marie Kellerman had given hers away, and in the giving had found something worth more than all of Vincent Holloway's blood money. She'd found her way back to herself. 3 months passed before Marie heard anything definitive. 3 months of living in limbo, of jumping every time the phone rang, of watching Ethan struggle with nightmares about bones and forests and choices that couldn't be unmade. Frank had gone back on the road, hauling freight across the Midwest, but he called every night now, checking in, making sure they were okay. The distance between them had closed after she'd come clean, but it had left scar tissue, visible reminders of trust broken and painfully rebuilt. The letter from the Pennsylvania State Police arrived on a gray October morning. Marie stood in the kitchen, the envelope in her hands, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. When Ethan appeared, asking if it was from them, Marie could barely speak. This letter would determine their future, whether she'd face criminal charges, whether they'd lose everything, whether the choice she'd made to confess would destroy them after all. Her hands shook as she tore it open. The letter brought stunning news. No criminal charges would be filed against Marie Kellerman, Frank Kellerman, Ethan Kellerman, or Dale Pritchard in connection with the concealment of evidence. The voluntary disclosure and cooperation had been taken into consideration. But there was more. The remains discovered in the treehouse had been identified through dental records as Anthony Tony Marchetti, age 34 at time of death, reported missing in September 1968. The notebook recovered at the scene had provided crucial evidence in 17 unsolved homicides spanning 1957 to 1968. 17 families would finally receive closure after decades of uncertainty.
The letter revealed that Robert Carlyle, who'd visited Mr. Whitmore's office, was actually Marcus Del Vecchio, a former associate of Vincent Holloway, searching for Vincent's insurance policy. He'd been arrested and now faced charges of identity theft and trespassing. Most remarkably, the property debts Marie feared were largely fraudulent, attempts by Vincent's associates to prevent the property from being freely sold or transferred. The actual debt obligation was only $8,400 in back taxes, not the impossible sum she believed, and the monetary assets recovered might be eligible for reward distribution under federal whistleblower provisions. Marie read it 3 times to make sure it was real. No charges, families getting closure, a chance at the property, a chance at redemption. When Ethan read it, his expression transformed. Fear giving way to relief, relief giving way to something that looked almost like pride. 17 families, he said quietly. That's a lot of people who finally get to know what happened. Marie called Frank first, then Dale. Everyone was clear. The nightmare was over. 2 weeks later, Mr. Whitmore called with news about the whistleblower reward. The federal government was offering them 12% of the recovered assets, approximately $360,000. There was one condition. Marie had to testify in several upcoming trials. The FBI wanted her to help prosecute people who'd profited from violence, who'd destroyed families, who'd built empires on suffering. Despite the potential danger, Marie agreed. Whatever they need, she said.
The trials began in the spring. Marie testified in 3 separate cases, each time telling the story honestly, never minimizing her own initial attempt to conceal evidence, but also never wavering in her commitment to seeing justice served. In the courtroom, she saw the faces of families who'd waited 50 years for answers. After one testimony, a woman in her 70s, the daughter of one of Vincent's victims, approached Marie, took her hands, and said simply, "Thank you for finally telling the truth." Those words stayed with Marie, not for finding the evidence, not for turning it over, but for telling the truth, something Constance had spent her life trying to do, chasing answers that had been hidden in her own forest the entire time. After the last trial concluded, Marie, Frank, and Ethan decided to transform the property rather than sell it. Frank's words had resonated. Maybe they owed it to Constance to transform the place into something good, something that honored both its history and its potential for redemption. It was Ethan who suggested turning the Victorian house into a retreat center for families dealing with loss, for people who needed a quiet place to heal. The Constance Merriweather Center, Frank said, trying it out. A place for people searching for truth, for closure, for peace. They worked with therapists and counselors to develop programs, reached out to organizations that helped families of missing persons, created scholarships funded by their reward money. The center opened 18 months after Marie had first received that cream-colored envelope from Whitmore Associates. At the opening ceremony, Dale stood with Marie, Frank, and Ethan, watching people tour the facility. Rebecca Torres was there. Her grandfather had been one of Vincent's victims, and she'd waited her whole life for answers. After finding closure through Marie's confession, Rebecca gave Marie a letter her grandmother had written years ago for whoever might find the truth. Truth is the only currency that matters in the end. Truth and the courage to speak it, even when silence would be easier. In her speech at the opening, Marie spoke honestly about her journey. My great-aunt Constance spent 60 years searching for truth. When I inherited this place, I inherited her burden too. For a brief, shameful moment, I chose to carry it the way she did, by hiding truth, by keeping secrets, by prioritizing my own needs over justice. But I learned something essential. Truth isn't a treasure to be hoarded. It's a gift to be shared, no matter how painful. She explained how the center existed because sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing, and because healing requires honesty, and peace requires justice, and redemption requires the courage to admit when we've been wrong. Over the following months, they completed the transformation. Frank quit trucking to manage the center and lead grief groups. Dale stayed on as caretaker and historian, compiling the property's history into an educational resource. Ethan, profoundly changed by the experience, decided to study criminal justice, determined to solve crimes and bring closure to families. 5 years later, Marie stood in the grand foyer of the thriving center and watched autumn light stream through restored stained glass windows. 73 guests were currently in residence, people from across the country seeking peace, understanding, or simply a place where their complicated grief was understood. Marie, now 41 with streaks of gray in her hair, had agreed to participate in a documentary about the case. During the interview, she spoke candidly about her failure. "I was thinking about debt, about my son never having opportunities, about my husband working himself to exhaustion, but underneath that I think I was thinking about myself, about feeling powerless my whole life and suddenly having power. The money wasn't just about security, it was about finally feeling like I counted." When asked what changed her mind, she explained, "When I looked at my son and saw judgment in his eyes. When I lied to my husband and felt the distance it created. When I realized that the person I was becoming, someone who could look at human remains and see opportunity instead of tragedy, that wasn't who I wanted to be. Poverty had never made me feel as poor as that choice did." The filmmaker asked if she considered herself a hero. Marie was firm. "I don't think redemption erases mistakes. I think it just means you learned from them. Yes, good came from my choices eventually, but that doesn't erase the fact that my first choice was wrong. I can't take credit for the good that followed without also owning the selfishness that preceded it." The documentary brought a shocking revelation. Researchers had found Vincent Holloway's remains buried in the forest, about 2 miles from where Tony Marchetti was found. DNA testing confirmed he was executed in 1968, meaning Constance had spent 60 years searching for a man who was buried less than a mile from her house the entire time. Marie decided to have Vincent buried next to Constance. She spent 60 years waiting for him. She deserves to be reunited, even if it's just their bones, even if he didn't deserve her love. It was about completing the story, about giving Constance what she wanted, even if she never knew she wanted it. The story concluded with evidence of transformation's ripple effects. Rebecca Torres called to announce her engagement and asked to have her wedding at the center, where it all came together, where we finally found answers. Her fiancé's brother had also disappeared years ago, and he wanted to come seek healing, just as Rebecca's family had. Healing was breeding healing, redemption spreading, one person's courage creating a cascade of change for countless others. That night, Marie reflected on her journey. She'd come to Pennsylvania looking for an inheritance and discovered something far more valuable. Through failure and fear, through confession and consequence, through work and wisdom, she'd found herself, the real Marie Kellerman, who could fall and rise, who could fail and recover, who could look at her worst choices and her best ones and accept them both as part of her story. The inheritance she'd received was complicated, dark, weighted with violence and secrets. But the inheritance she was leaving, for Ethan, for countless guests, for everyone who'd hear her story, was pure light forged from darkness through the courage to choose truth over comfort. The haunting was over. The healing would never end. And in the quiet darkness of an October night, in a house reclaimed from ghosts, in a forest transformed from graveyard to sanctuary, Marie Kellerman closed her eyes and slept the sleep of the redeemed. Not because she'd never fallen, but because she'd gotten back up, brushed herself off, and chosen to build something beautiful from the ashes of her mistakes.